Hello, in this video, we're going to be talking about general information for cellular respiration. Let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now, when we're talking cellular respiration, the number one thing that we want to think about is that cycle between cellular respiration and photosynthesis, or you can think of it as as plants and animals. You want to talk about the circle of life that they talk about in the Lion King. This right here is it. This exchange between animals and plants, heterotrophs, autotrophs, whatever, however you want to look at it, is such an important cycle. I mean, you could almost say that life itself depends on this cycle, and you wouldn't be far from that. The idea of the gases that are exchanged, the concept of what one considers waste, the other considers a need, and vice versa. But the idea that photosynthesis gives off oxygen, which we need, the very essence of, to stay alive, and we give off carbon dioxide, which we consider a waste, and plants need that in order to conduct photosynthesis. So it is such an amazing cycle. But it's that idea of the gases that you really want to think about when you look at the formulas for these two. I mean, they're front and center as the product, they're front and center as the reactants. So just make sure you understand the gases that are released. We release carbon dioxide, and plants release oxygen. Now, the idea of this cycle, I just mentioned these two words, but you want to make sure that you understand what they are. Autotrophs is the idea of organisms that produce their own food. Okay, now, and you always have that student that says, "Well, my mom produces her own food. She goes in the kitchen, makes that." No, we're not talking about cooking. We're talking about at the cellular level, producing your own food. Autotrophs, so obviously that's plants, but there's a few others. There's some photosynthetic bacteria, some protists do it as well, but plants certainly in our world, first and foremost. And then there's the heterotrophs, organisms that have to eat in order to get the food that they need. And I say food in air quotes. The sugars that we talked about in the macromolecules, chapter 3. Those sugars, the glucose, and we talked about glucose being stored in us, in the animals, as glycogen, and the plant stored as starch. That's why you hear so much about starches, potatoes, pasta, whatever. But the last thing, or another thing to think about, is a lot of students think that, okay, plants do photosynthesis, we do cellular respiration. No, we only do cellular respiration, but plants do both. Okay, they photosynthesize and they do cellular respiration. They're not making the sugars for the herbivores, which then get to us. No, they're making them for themselves. There's just the systems in place where the herbivores come along and eat the plant material, and then we come along and eat the carnivores. I mean the herbivores, whether it's beef, poultry, chicken, whatever, or we just eat plant material ourselves, vegetables and stuff. So, but both conduct cellular respiration. Alright, and so I mentioned the formula. Here is the formula for cellular respiration. You got that glucose molecule, C6H12O6. It's got that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, so you know it's a carbohydrate. And you got 6 oxygen molecules. okay, that are also used, and that produces, okay, gets it broke down, and we're gonna go over that process of the glucose molecule getting broke down pretty heavily, both here, obviously, and in the classroom through a variety of activities. But once that molecule is broken down, you're going to get 6 carbon dioxides, you're going to get 6 water molecules, and you're going to get lots of released energy between the ATP, which is the main focal point of cellular respiration, producing those ATP molecules. But again, here's one of our words, exergonic. Okay, we are breaking down a molecule, so it means we're releasing kinetic energy. It's an exergonic reaction. Catabolic pathways, all these words that we've been stressing and using here, we're continuing that process. We know that it is hydrolysis involved. Obviously, it's cellular respiration, and we know that we can say that the glucose molecule is certainly getting oxidized, and we're going to look at plenty of electron carriers that are going to be reduced. So all those words come into play, and again, as we mentioned many times, this is not a one thing process. If one is happening, then the opposite is happening as well. So glucose is being oxidized, means somebody else is being reduced. If there's an exergonic reaction happening with glucose, then you know there's an endergonic reaction happening somewhere else. So these things work in tandems, as we've talked about many times, and this is done, and we'll see a diagram later on that shows this, but this is done in small steps, and that's because the cells are trying to capture the energy that's released. If you think about a firecracker exploding, that energy would be hard to capture in one big, explosion. But it's carbon dioxide or cellular respiration is done in small steps, so the cell has a chance to capture energy. And we saw an example of ways that the cell utilizes strategies to make sure the energy is used as efficient as possible. When we looked at the plasma membrane, active transport, the idea of primary and secondary transport, the ATP molecule that is used to initiate primary transport releases a bunch of energy, but it's more energy than the transport needs, so the cell then uses a second transaction, uses some of that energy to get the second transaction done. So the cell has strategies to use this energy as efficiently as possible. Well, that's our video for the first of the cellular respiration general information. When we come back next time, we'll be doing part 2 of cellular respiration general information. So we'll see you then.